Every apartment is already telling a story. The question was never whether yours has one. It's whether you're the one writing it or whether it got written by accident. Here's how to read it and how to take back the pen. The first thing to understand is that your entryway is already an opening line, whether it was written on purpose or not. This is a different lens than the arrival sequence covered elsewhere on this channel, which is about whether the first 90 seconds feel calm. This is about something more specific, what those first 90 seconds say about the person who lives there. A wall of framed photographs by the door tells a different opening line than a single striking piece of art. A shoe rack in full view tells a different one than a closed cabinet. Neither is wrong, but they are not the same sentence, and most people never chose theirs deliberately. A good opening line doesn't explain everything. It raises a question the rest of the space will go on to answer. If your entry currently says nothing in particular, that's not neutral. It's just an opening line nobody wrote on purpose.
The second thing is about every doorway and hallway in the apartment, not just the front door. And it borrows directly from how architects design narrative sequence in larger buildings. A threshold, in storytelling terms, is a moment of anticipation before a reveal. A narrow hallway that opens into a brighter room functions the same way a corridor in a museum leads toward a gallery. The compression before the release is part of what makes the reveal land. Most apartments treat hallways as pure circulation, dead space to get through as fast as possible, when they are actually one of the few genuine narrative devices a small apartment has room for. This doesn't require construction. It can be as simple as what's visible from a hallway versus what's deliberately held back until the room is fully entered. A piece of art positioned so it's only seen once you're already inside, rather than visible from 3 rooms away. The transition itself can be part of what the space is saying, not just the destination.
The third thing requires a distinction that matters more than it first appears. A separate video on this channel covers the idea of an anchor, one element a room organizes around visually, so the eye has a clear place to begin. A protagonist object is related but different. It's not about where the eye starts, it's about what the room is actually about. An anchor could be a large piece of furniture chosen purely because of its size and position. A protagonist object is chosen because it carries meaning, a piece from a specific trip, something made by someone the person knows, an object with an actual story behind it that the rest of the room is quietly built in support of. A room can have a strong visual anchor with no real protagonist at all, which is exactly why some highly resolved, well-composed rooms still feel emotionally empty. The visual hierarchy is correct, the story has no main character. Finding the protagonist object in your own space means asking a different question than what looks good where. It means asking what single thing in this room, if removed, would make the space feel like it lost its subject, not just its focal point.
The fourth thing is a storytelling principle borrowed directly from writing, and it applies to what gets displayed in a room and what gets put away. This is a different question than the one covered in a separate video about worn objects carrying personal history.
This is about editing, the decision of what to reveal and what to withhold, regardless of whether the object itself is old or new. A shelf with every book owned crammed onto it tells the reader everything at once, and readers who are told everything at once tend to absorb none of it. A shelf with a handful of carefully chosen books and space around them tells less and communicates more, because restraint signals that what remains was actually chosen. The apartment version of Show Don't Tell is asking, for any surface currently full, whether everything on it needs to be visible right now, or whether some of it would say more about you by being edited out. A story that shows everything at once isn't a story, it's an inventory. The fifth thing is about rhythm, and it's one of the more overlooked storytelling devices in a physical space. A well-paced story alternates between dense, eventful moments and quieter stretches that let the reader breathe. A well-paced room does the same thing visually. A room where every single surface is equally busy, equally detailed, equally full of things to look at, has no rhythm. There's nowhere for the eye to rest, which means there's also nowhere for any individual detail to stand out, because everything is competing for attention at the same volume simultaneously. A room with genuine pacing has quiet stretches, a plain wall, an empty corner, a bare stretch of counter, positioned specifically so the detailed moments elsewhere have somewhere to land in contrast. Walking through your own space and noticing whether visual density stays constant throughout or whether it rises and falls the way a well-told story does is the entire exercise. Constant density isn't richness, it's noise. The sixth thing is the hardest to articulate and possibly the most important. Every well-told story can usually be summarized in one sentence, and every well-designed space can too, even if nobody ever writes it down. This isn't the same as a style label. Scandinavian or minimalist describes a look. A sentence describes a meaning. This is a place built for slowing down. This is a space for someone who left home to build something entirely their own. This is a room for a person who collects moments more than objects. The sentence isn't decoration, it's the thesis the rest of the design decisions are either supporting or quietly contradicting. Most apartments were never given this sentence on purpose, which means the story they're telling was assembled by accident, one purchase and one arrangement at a time, with no single thread holding it together. Writing the sentence first, even loosely, gives every subsequent decision, the protagonist, object, the pacing, what gets shown and what gets edited out, something to actually serve. The seventh thing connects rooms to each other rather than treating each one as its own isolated story, and it borrows a technique directly from fiction: foreshadowing, a small, quiet reference to something that gets its full reveal later. This is different from the zone transition principle covered elsewhere on this channel, which is about clearly separating spaces from each other. This is about the opposite instinct, deliberately connecting them.
A material, a color, or a shape that appears in a small, subtle way in one room and then reappears as a fuller, more central element in another creates a thread the eye picks up on even without consciously tracking it. A brass detail that shows up small on a picture frame in the entry and then reappears as a full pendant light in the kitchen is not a coincidence, it's a callback. Without this thread, a series of individually well-designed rooms can still feel like disconnected short stories rather than chapters of the same book. The apartment version of finding this thread is picking one material or color deliberately and planting a small, quiet version of it somewhere it will be recalled later.
The eighth and last thing is about time, and it's worth distinguishing clearly from a separate principle covered elsewhere on this channel about knowing when a room is finished. That principle is about completing one round of a space, the living test, the finishing layer. This is about something longer, accepting that the story itself keeps going long after any single round is complete. The apartment that felt exactly right 2 years ago may not fully reflect who's living in it now. And design that treats a current state as the permanent final version tends to calcify rather than grow. A story worth telling usually has more than one chapter. A protagonist object from 5 years ago might get quietly retired, not because it was wrong, but because the story moved on from it. New objects enter not because the room ran out of things, but because the person living there has more to say than they did when the room was first arranged. This isn't permission to be indecisive. It's permission to treat your own space the way a person treats their own life, as something still being written, rather than something that had to be finished correctly on the first draft.
Your apartment is telling a story right now, whether or not you wrote it on purpose. Subscribe for more and tell us below, in one sentence, what is your space actually saying?